Welcome to the second episode of Carbon Based Gaming Radio. I'm Steve Tom Sawyer.
And I'm Robin Gething.
Carbon Based Gaming Radio is brought to you in part by SoundCloud Ultimate.
Mindless Zombie Studios is an up-and-coming website for gaming and geek culture. From video game reviews of traditional games to what it's like to be gamers and geeks, MZS seeks to cover it all with voices from the community. MindlessZombieStudios.com, because gaming isn't dead, it's undead.
So, dude, this is gonna be a weird one. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of ground to cover, and we're talking about things in a explorational kind of existential sort of way. Are you ready for this?
I can live with existential.
We talked to Sean, and we're going to get into part 2 of that conversation with him. And he talks about everybody's favorite game lately, Hatred.
Well, a certain subset of people's favorite game, I would say. It's not everybody's flavor of the month right now.
Everybody sure loves talking about it, though, don't they?
They love talking about it. What they're saying about it isn't necessarily what I would distinguish as love.
Well, we're sort of guilty of the same thing because we got into it with him. But there it is, and that's going to be on this episode. And then the other thing we're going to kind of get into with Brad Carney, who's the creator of Skulltag for Doom and the developer and creator of Rack on Steam right now, is sort of why we play video games in the first place, and why video games sort of bring us together as a culture and a community. He gets into a lot of different discussions in that interview, and I was really impressed at his breadth of knowledge and his frames of reference, to be completely honest with you.
Well, I mean, even in the simplest of games, you have to really be thinking on a much more cerebral level than people would give you credit for, really.
When he gets into some of the reasons why he develops games, I think that's when the conversation really takes a turn for the deep and introspective. But it's refreshing to hear that kind of conversation from somebody who made an arcade shooter. You wouldn't really, like I said, you wouldn't really expect that, but
if you have a look at Carmack, for example, he's obviously an incredibly intelligent chap, and if you listen to some of the things he said while making Doom and things like that, I mean, that's just basically just running around and blowing the hell out of demons and whatnot. But there is a lot more to it than people realize at the time.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the exciting things, I think, for us doing the show, is that this interview is going to serve as a testament and an example of the kinds of conversations we want to have with developers here in the future. It's going to be really cool to kind of peel the onion, layer by layer, and get into how these people make games, why they make games, and blow away the expectation of the public in that regard. I think, just like you said, there's a lot more going on than people give them credit for, and it's worth exploring that and figuring out why the hell is something like System Shock so damn good.
Somebody needs to explain it.
Well, I'd like explanation, because here it is, 15 years later, and they haven't made a game, that to me is as crazy, as in-depth, or as difficult, or, there's things like that in my mind that stand out as these, like, shining beacons of game design, and I always sit there and ponder, like, how? Why? How the hell did somebody come up with this? Like, why did they come up with this? I want to know. I have so many questions. I demand answers. So I'm going to use this show as my own personal vehicle for finding out why System Shock was really great. Well, with that being said, let's get into episode 2 of my giant ruse to talk to Ken Levine about System Shock 2 and get into why Sean thinks there should be some deeper conversations about the representation of art in video games.
And if you're listening, Ken, answer your phone calls.
Please. Do you feel like when something like Hatred, debuts a trailer like this week, and let me preface this a little bit for anybody who's uneducated to the fact of what Hatred is. A trailer for a video game was released this week, and the entire
I guess the core gameplay or the entire point of the game is to literally arm yourself to the teeth in a trench coat. You know, the guy's got long black hair. He looks like a typical white anti-hero. And his whole goal is to kill as many innocent civilians as possible before being violently killed himself by, you know, a large reaction of law enforcement. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about when we're asking Sean about hatred. Who do we get to kind of deconstruct that? Do we get the journalist or do we get the critic? You know, when there's something like that that's kind of collectively makes everybody uncomfortable, who do we pick out from the two sides of that coin to kind of deconstruct that and make sense of that to the general public? And then I'm going to have another very direct question for you about that game itself.
So, yeah, I mean, I just look at it. We give these things power, right? We give these things power by talking about them, by going over and over and over and over again. And when I watched it, I was like, this game is going to get more people purchasing this game because people talking about the condemnation of the coverage than it is if people would just fucking, you know, ignore it. But unfortunately, we don't live in a world where people are going to ignore that conversation. Anytime people see an opportunity to create a larger dialogue, and that's fine. Anytime people see an opportunity to create a larger dialogue, they're going to create that larger dialogue. And especially people that are not in video games press and just a little bit more in general press. I think it's easy, low-hanging fruit. You know, I think that the future Jack Thompsons of the world are now going to have something to point to. But I do think, you know, as we talked about before, there is this level of the reason I look at we need to have better journalistic integrity in the video games industry, and not even necessarily integrity, we just need to have a better representation is truthfully what I believe in all this stuff, because there's no trust there. You know, there's no trust that the gaming community can put it in the hands of Polygon or Kotaku or IGN, and that they'll represent it in the way that is fair and balanced to video gamers.
If you had to pick one person right now in the video game world who you feel like could fairly deconstruct that trailer and put it, you know, and make a case for the industry at large, knowing that exists, and sit them in front of like a Fox News television camera, who would you elect to give that dirty job to?
Whew, that's, wow. Yeah, you nailed me on a really, really good question there. I think it needs to be a collection of people. You know, I think that if we hold up anybody into, you know, one particular esteem, you know, it's just, I look at it like this, right? There have been plenty of articles that I've read from particular journalists that I said, you know what, I agree with that. And then I'll see a tweet and I'm like, dude, that rubs me totally, you know, the wrong way. I mean, there have been situations on both sides that I'm just like, I don't, you know, and it's easy, right? People are people and people are fallible and people make mistakes, and it's way easier to attack somebody's character than it is to attack the issues at hand, because then you actually have to do work and research and stuff like that. So, you know, I think that, again, it comes back to, do we want to go that route? You know, like we've already reached here, right? We've reached this point where there is, whether you like it or not, a large amount of distrust for the people that cover video games because they don't think that they're going to cover them correctly, right? So should we continue to go down the road of giving those people that power and continuing to build them up in that esteem where they feel like they do have that power and they do have that soapbox? And the answer for me is no. I don't want to be that person. You know, I would love to be somebody that has opinions about the video gaming industry that people listen to. Of course, I think that's what everybody wants in the gaming industry. But I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that has to sit there, you know, and I could list off to you 15 names that would make sense in that position. But I don't think that anybody should be that person. But I think that we do need to have a group of people that say, we're just going to ignore this. You know, this is stupid, and we condemn it, and we think it's a joke. But if they want to create that game, they can create that game. We're just not going to buy it, and we're going to flat out condemn it. And when you have an audience, when you have a community that you can put your back to and say, our community stands with what we're saying, right? Then, you know, Sean Allen can come on and represent Pulp 365, the community, not represent just himself or one particular group of people. But we need better representation in that. And to do that, we need to be unified.
Well, okay, so let me ask you another pointed question about this title. One of the big contentions before, when critics emerged of things like Grand Theft Auto or Doom, if you really want to go real far back with it, or any other, pick the first person shooter that you want to use as your Mad Libs fill in the blank here. One of the points of contention from the gaming industry side was, yes, there's all those things. There's guns, there's violence, there's over the top, kind of depictions of these horrible things going on. But at the core of it, there's more to it. With Grand Theft Auto, there's this idea that it's wrapping all of this around some central narrative. It's a send up of crime capers or heist movies or the Godfather series.
It's also meant to be satirical. It's also meant to be
exactly.
Yeah.
There's subtext here, but when we're presented collectively, with something like this, and there's a pundit on Fox News who's saying, "But this is literally just a murder simulator." Where's the silver lining for us as a gaming community to then be able to say, "Yes, but what is the but after that? What comes after that comma?"
I think the but comes from action. The but comes from being a representation of the community and the people within that community that you want to create. It bothers me a lot of times that people want to make any issue black and white, that they want to throw in, this is what Republicans think and this is what Democrats think. And, I'm flat out, a major freaking liberal. I lived in San Francisco for 2 years. So it's the level of, look, man, I believe that true liberalism, true progressive nature resides in action and not just saying you're progressive. If you say you're progressive and you say how you're all about all of these different things, but you never show it in your actions or demonstrate it in your real life, then you're not living by the example that you want to leave. And so I think that there's this level of it's fucking easy to attack us, man. It's easy to attack the video gaming industry. It's easy to attack the video gaming industry because if you went and said all movies are violent garbage and even something that's PG-13, it's ruining my child, and I'm offended by The Incredibles, and I'm offended by what this says about this, right? The MPAA is going to come out and they're going to say, no, fuck you. The Screen Actors Guild is going to come out and they're going to say that, right? Like, we don't have that, in our industry. And if the ESA is going to be our representation, the ones who have been known for doing so much shady shit surrounding E3, then what do we really have? And so what I want to do, really, I think, and where I think things head, is creating that larger community at large that we can point out and say, you know what, dude, anybody with common sense, they'll listen to what people sensationalize on the news, but when they go and they see how we really are, they'll know we're not that way. They'll know we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to grow beyond that. We're trying to, at least overcome a lot of the categorizations that are negative about our industry.
I think for me, a lot of the comparisons that some people have brought up because the film industry is something, for some reason, everybody likes to draw parallels between ourselves and the film industry.
And we're so much different.
Yes, we are. But one thing that I will concede to, which is kind of a good way of looking at things, but is also just sort of a larger question in and of itself. Someone said, hatred to me seems to be the video game counterpart to something like a Serbian film or, the Human Centipede Part 1 and 2, where it's basically anti-art. It's anti-establishment for the sake of being anti-establishment. Now we get into sort of this larger central conversation about the role of censorship in art and the role of art as a vehicle to either, defy or encapsulate how important it is to defy censorship. Do you feel like a game like Hatred is important to exist because it pleads a case for the fight against censorship? Is Hatred an anti-hero?
Fuck no. Is my answer to that. Absolutely fucking not, dude. Have you ever seen the Uwe Boll Postal movie that he did?
Yeah.
I mean, I from watching the preview, and I, full disclosure, I've not seen the entire movie, but like, I'm just like, dude, you're just doing it to do it, man. You're just doing it to see if it could be done, right? Like, am I gonna go out and say a bunch of really fucking racy shit to try and test the boundaries of censorship? The whole point of that game is for people to criticize it, and for people to be inherently negative, and then for people to create this persona of, it's this censorship, aspect of things. And I'm trying to think of movies that have done it in the same, like, okay, here's my
Driver.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but that's the thing, dude, is that like Taxi Driver is like fucking, it has a meaning to it, right? And here's the question that I would ask you, right? What's the difference between Hatred and Hotline Miami?
This is the thing. I don't have the benefit of knowing what the resolution of Hatred may or may not be. So I don't have the benefit of playing the game.
Oh, I thought you meant like screen resolution. I was like,
No. I don't get the benefit.
It's not 1080p.
I don't get the benefit of knowing if at the end of the game, there's a 15-minute like introspective sequence where.
And that is sort of my point to the I guess judgment aspects of it, is like, dude,
sure.
You know what? If you feel the game is, which I totally feel, if you think that it's manipulating censorship.
Let me jump in here and put it this way. Have you ever seen A Birth of a Nation?
No.
It's basically an incredibly, terribly fucked up movie about slavery. Mm-hmm. But Roger Ebert, it's one of, I wouldn't say it's one of his favorite movies, but he calls it one of the best films of all time. And it deals with a very controversial, very, loathed period of our dark history as a country. Yeah. The way that the film itself is done and shot, it's remarkable. It's a remarkable piece of art. Mm-hmm. But what it's dealing with is just absolutely horrendous. When does outsider art redeem itself? Like something like A Clockwork Orange is another good example of that. A lot of people can point to that and say it's a glorification of violence, of rape culture, of, over the top human garbage behavior. But at the end of the film, there's a very poignant and very, cutting and incisive commentary on the human experience.
Torches of the damned. Torches of the damned.
So I guess where this is the big question at the end of all of this. Where, in terms of things like hatred, where do we, as a collective gaming community, have to kind of say, you don't get it, that's terrible, or actually that's our anti-hero?
I mean, it's. I'm looking through the interview that Polygon did with the developers. So yeah, I mean, my thing was going to say, has anybody actually reached out to the developers? Like, because it seems like, I mean, good on Polygon for sure for actually reaching out to the developers and asking them questions, because all I saw yesterday was people talking about the game and not actually, talking about, hey, do we ask what the people that made this game, why they're making it? It's exact their representation and their, I don't know if you want to call it excuse or whatever you want to call it, but their response is it's anti-art. And it's trying to be subversive, and it's trying to, and so, on that level, dude, I look at it like, what is the difference, right? Like, I had a great conversation when the guys who created Hotline Miami were in for Game of the Year in 2013. They were in at IGN, and we went out for drinks, and like really fucking awesome dudes, by the way. I don't think that they knew what they had, and I don't think that they were trying to make statements that they inevitably made, albeit potentially subconsciously to some degree. But I think that there was this level of people really saw something within that game and saw a statement that was trying to be made. And I don't know if that was necessarily the entire game was built around that statement. And without getting too much into the conversation that I had with them, I'm sure that you can look up the story of how Hotline Miami came to be and stuff like that. But I don't think that they had created that game to say something larger, but inevitably it did. It did say something larger, and people took what they wanted to take out of that. And I think South Park has made jokes about that all the time, about people reading way too much into what people said. I mean, I remember when 300 came out, and everyone was just like, oh, dude, this is an anti-Bush movie. And they're like, no, this is a pro-Bush movie. And Zack Snyder's like, no, it's just a fucking movie And that's the level of like, you know, people are going to read into things the way that they want to read into them, or they're going to, you know, walk away from it. But I think, look, dude, if you don't want to give the game power, don't cover it. You know, it's no one's going to buy this game anyway. And the people that do, dude, you know, whatever reason that they want to buy the game for, but I don't look at it as, dude, let's keep it around, man. I think Kuchera wrote this on Polygon. I do appreciate what he said. I think it was him, on the level of like, dude, just make this a joke, man. You know, if you laugh about this, you take away the power of. I don't see a problem with them wanting to create that game. I don't think that we should fucking, you know, organize bans of it, but I don't think that we should give it any credence by giving it value to any conversation.
Thank you so much, Sean, for coming on. Your insight into all of this has been invaluable, and I know that our listeners are going to have their minds blown by the perspective that you brought here today. If anybody wants to keep up with you, where can they find you? What's your Twitter? Where do you do your writing? What are you working on next? Do you own a food truck? Tell us these things.
Oh my God, I wish I owned a food truck. I am at Necronomicon, so like Necronomicon with Sean in it on Twitter, so you can hit me up there. And also, obviously, the founder of Pulp 365, and right now we're actively looking for community members to come and start writing in our community. So you can shoot me an email at sean@pulp365.com, or you can just go check out the website.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Love you guys. I love you. Love you.
You keep some of those whispers in there.
I love you guys.
Okay. The first thing you take away after listening to Sean for an extended amount of time is, you know, just how remarkably intelligent the dude is, and how introspective he is, which I think, you know, surprised a lot of people last week when they, you know, listened to his thoughts about community and engagement and everything else. And I think, again, this week, people are going to be surprised at his outlook on representation of art, and more specifically, hatred. He had some pretty strong words about the game.
I think more than anything else, when you're listening to him, I mean, you know, that's all you want to really do is listening to him. I can imagine going out with the guy and everyone just sitting silent while he talks, and it's like, would anyone like to be part of the conversation? You know, he's just brilliant.
It is pretty commanding.
I think he's probably taken hatred really as just a death by cop sim.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I mean, you can tell that just in sort of the engagement there's no love lost. I mean, he doesn't seem like he's going to be purchasing, you know, the game anytime after its release. But at the same time, he was very honest in saying that we're in a position where we have to defend its right to be created.
You know, I look at it more like it's like the natural born killers of games, really. It's that blow it out the end of a shotgun, fuck it.
But is it? See, that's sort of the crux of the conversation I got into with him. Is it really that? Or are we getting into, like he said, just a sim without a silver lining? Because sort of the argument that and it's circular at this point, but one of the, you know, conversations we've been having with people, you know, I kind of got into this a little bit with Janelle in the producer's cut of last week's episode, is that for a lot of those ultra-violent experiences that are presented to us, there's sort of a greater resolution that I don't want to say redeems all the shit you just witnessed, but it frames it in a different way. You know, a film like Falling Down with Michael Douglas. You know, the guy goes on
ultra-violent.
Yeah, I mean, the guy kind of goes nuts and ends up with an arsenal by the end of the movie. But in every single scenario, you can kind of see, like, you know, where he's coming from in a weird kind of way. It's like you identify with the dude in a strange sort of way. It humanizes him. It adds this weird, peculiar silver lining that makes you sort of uncomfortable and questioning a lot about yourself and a lot about the movie. But I don't know that we can say that same sort of a thing about hatred.
Well, maybe more along the lines of, say, Clockwork Orange. I mean, if you just boil it down to the ultra-violence of it all and the sort of like the almost acid-driven, sort of sublime weirdness of it all, And if you just ignore the basic message that's actually underlying it, you can pretty much write it off as a very ugly film, couldn't you?
Well, that gets into, should that even be a core of a conversation when you're discussing a video game? Is the content of the game going to warrant a demerit if the mechanics are solid? So if Hatred ends up being a really super polished isometric shooter, should I give it an A because all of the mechanics of the game are fantastic? Or do I get to say, I don't think that this game should get an A. I think that this game should have, if anything, points deducted from it because you're murdering innocent people in the face.
Well, there are political connotations within this. It's like a political song. You could say, well, let's say Rage Against the Machine. What if the sound quality isn't that good?
Right.
It's difficult, isn't it? And when it comes down to the story, I mean, none of us have actually seen the story as it is right now. It's from what we've heard from some of our interviews, it is mainly about the game more than anything else. So,
do you think that you would be able to appreciate a Rage Against the Machine album if every element about their music was completely the same, except that the lyrics were advocating for you to support Al Qaeda?
That's different. That's difficult to say. I mean, obviously, when it comes down to it, I wouldn't be supporting Al Qaeda,
right?
So it's difficult for me to do that. But if the music's good, it shouldn't mean that we should sort of write off the album either.
You're like, look, man, if they're gonna go ahead and pledge a fatwa, but Tom Morello's slinging an axe, I'm signing up. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a riff I can listen to. I just don't bother with the lyrics, Fuck you, I won't do as you tell me.
Right. But you'll be there at their shows buying t-shirts.
Head banging with the rest.
See, I don't know that I'm in a position where I can put myself in enough of a state of healthy detachment to really be objective when it comes to something like that. So I don't think, if given the opportunity, I'm probably not the guy to review Hatred, because I do feel a certain way about it. And I know that the way that I feel about it would inhibit my capability to give it an objective score, because I couldn't review the game just solely on its mechanics. It would be the sum of its parts, and elements of those parts creep me out and make me uncomfortable.
Well, I think that's part of the game. I mean, you could say that about a horror movie or a horror game or whatever like that. It's like parts of that does creep you out. It does make you feel uncomfortable. And I mean, it's asking you to question yourself in many ways.
But that's the thing. Again, I mean, something we're going to get into, I'm sure, as we talk more and more about this game in future episodes, is that when I play something like, I don't know, any other number of games where I have to blow someone to pieces,
I could give you an idea of that. Really, look at like a zombie game, for example, yeah, where you're basically killing loads of innocent people. The only difference is that you're morally allowed to.
Right. It's framing. You're right. It is all about context and framing. I mean, arguably, I've seen games that are way more violent than anything I saw in the trailer for Hatred, and that's true. But the framing of it, I think it creates a sense of detachment in your mind where you're like, oh, okay, this is okay. Fallout New Vegas, perfect example. That game is insanely more violent than anything I saw in the Hatred trailer.
Yeah.
But it's the framing. If anything, there's been times where, I see an eyeball flying past the screen and I almost die laughing, watching some of the kill cams in Fallout New Vegas.
That's right, but you've had it sanitized for you, you see.
Right.
What they're actually doing is throwing it right in your face and kind of going, here you go, you really are killing innocent human beings here at this point. So if anything, it sends actually a message in the opposite direction for you.
So do you think that maybe the issue isn't the game, it's just that we're a piece of crap society that's gotten completely desensitized?
Well, no. What I mean is that if you can imagine, they're actually helping you question that for yourself. I mean, you're saying that you would have a hard time giving it that review simply from the way that it's framed. So yeah, you should feel uncomfortable about running around in the city and gunning down innocent people, shouldn't you?
Yeah, but why don't I when I'm playing Grand Theft Auto 5?
Window dressing.
Yeah.
They dress it up in a story. They dress it up in a plot. They dress it up in a thing, but it's still the same thing.
Do you think that the role of satire has something to do with that too, because GTA is basically a satirical send-up of, you know, a hyper exaggerated American culture.
Well, but if you have a look at Postal, and then you have a look at Postal 2, Postal was brutal, yeah, but Postal 2 decided to go with a bit more satire, really. So, you know, it's dressing. You know, it's satire generally in comedy, for example, is basically making a political point, but making you laugh at the same time. It's giving you a serious message, but putting a bit of sugar on the spoon.
No matter what, no matter the framing, no matter the content, no matter the context, we have to accept that the game is coming out, and if we want games to truly be free and be able to, you know, sort of touch whatever they want to touch, I have to defend its right to exist, but I don't have to defend the product itself. And that's
fine, I'll do it.
But ultimately, I think that's kind of what Sean was trying to say.
Our next guest is Brad Carney. He is the developer of a new game, Rack, and he is also the creator of a source port for the seminal first-person shooting classic Doom. That source port, of course, is Skulltag. Brad is here to talk to us today about the creation of video games, the reinterpretation of old things into new things, and the role of video games as a primary vehicle for art. Thank you, Brad, so much for being here with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, yeah, let's just kind of jump right into it. For everybody who's listening at home, let's just assume that nobody knows who you are and that you need to give them a quick little rundown. So take us through your little bio, if you will.
Sure. Well, I mean, for starters, I don't even know who I am. I mean, I'm just starting off here in the whole gaming scene, but as far as actually having released products and everything. But yeah, I started off, you know, as you said, making a Doom source port called Skulltag, kind of making games and just kind of the whole game design process. It's something that's been like ever since I've been a little kid. Like it's just always been my dream to start a video game company. And you know, as a kid, like you didn't really have the tools to really. This was before the internet, before Google, before you know you could do programming at home or really do anything. And kind of when Doom first came out and got popular and everything, it was really like one of the first games that you could get into modding with. So it just on top of it just being a great game and everything, like the whole modding aspect just really captured my interest. And when it first came out, you know, this was like the mid 90s. You know, I started doing some levels for, you know, some kind of little simple modding. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it, but it wasn't until they released the source code a few years later that I really got started with you know, kind of the modern version of Skulltag. But for those who don't know, like the source code to a program, it's basically like the blueprints. So it basically allows you to go in there. You can see what was done, and you can actually change it and rebuild it. So you know that allows modders to basically add new capabilities and do all sorts of fun new things with it.
And that's where you kind of got your formative steps into what you would kind of consider like the current arc of your career, right?
Right, yeah. When the source code came out, like that's basically where I learned programming. You know, it was just kind of getting knee deep in the source code, you know, kind of tinkering around with it and kind of, and then kind of supplementing my knowledge with, you know, books from Barnes and Noble and stuff, and then tutorials from the internet. I mean, this is kind of like when the internet was just starting to get popular, but you know, it was just kind of messing around with that I kind of got my start. I mean, it was a couple of years after that you know, I had enough, you know, skills and abilities that I was able to actually get a job in the industry, working on a couple AAA titles. You know, so I did that for a little while, and then I kind of decided, you know, it was time to start pursuing my dream of, you know, actually having my own game company. So yeah, I went back to school. I actually got my business degree, and I've been working on Rack ever since. And that just came out a couple weeks ago.
To sort of catch everybody up to speed, tell us what Rack is, and then if you would, I know you've been spending a lot of time in the last few weeks talking to people about what Rack is. I want you to spend almost as much time telling us what it isn't in a very deliberate kind of a sense.
Yeah, and I do realize in the bio part you did just kind of whip by the whole Rack part, but yeah. So okay, so it's yeah, as I said, you know, I did start, you know, I did work with Doom extensively, and I made that source port. It was obviously hugely influential on my life and just everything.
And
So, you know,
how old were you when you first, got your hands on a keyboard and sent some demons straight back to hell?
Oh, God. I mean, probably like 14, 15, 16. Somewhere in that range. I mean, this was about 20 years ago, so yeah, that sounds about right. It was like when I was first like starting to do like real hardcore projects for Doom. I mean, I think it was like 16, 17, so...
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, that takes me back.
Yeah. So I mean, Rack. It did start off, kind of as kind of like a Doom inspired kind of game, because I mean, when we started making it, it's like we just saw like this huge shortage of these games where you could run fast, you could keep all your weapons. We just kind of felt like the industry kind of abandoned this genre, and for no good reason, really.
One of the things, too, I guess I would like to kind of jump in there and ask you is, having talked about how the climate of modern shooters was different when you started developing this game, I would also like to think that you're, a pragmatic-minded person, and you understand the necessity to actually sell copies of your game.
Yes.
So you are kind of in a precarious situation where the approach to reinvention has to be enough to resonate with people who know those things, love those things, have experienced those things, and are drawn to those things, but also still new enough to appeal to people who are from a completely other end of that spectrum and only know Halo, only know Call of Duty, only know, these big, rigid, bulky dude shooters.
Right.
As somebody who, has been participatory in a big project is the sum total of all that, where do you find that balance between reinvention and regurgitation?
Well, first of all, it's definitely difficult. It's so hard, like when you're trying to like bring something back. And by the way, when we first started, like because like this is like 6 years ago or so. Back then, like we weren't so far removed from like the classic shooter. There were still like Painkiller games coming out, and they were fairly popular. Duke 4 had just come out, and all this. So when it comes out now it's like, oh my God, you're doing a Doom style shooter. Those last one of those was 100 years ago, and it just so I mean, we kind of get labeled as like old school, and it's a throwback, it's a retro, and it's like it wasn't retro when we started. It was more current then. But so I mean that's been a big challenge when you're kind of dealing with that. It really hurts people's ability to perceive it as something new, I think, and that's a real problem when it comes to marketing. It's like when people see these games, a game like this, they just kind of immediately go, oh, this is an older game, this is a retro game, and then that's kind of how they peg it. Like they don't. Mentally, they don't kind of like dig deeper than that. Whereas, like if a new like modern-ish game comes out, like people don't see it and go, "Oh, it's a new modern game." Like they appreciate the nuance and the difference of it compared to other modern games that come out. Like the weapons, in the original Doom, it's like we wanted to do like a. Kind of that same kind of thing, but actually balance it. So we're kind of taking that trope of like, oh, it's a melee weapon, oh, it's a pistol, oh, it's a shotgun, and we're actually trying to find a way to like make each of those useful and like balanced with each other. So I mean, for instance, like it's like our melee weapon, like it's actually incredibly useful. It does a lot of damage. It has a wide arc to it. So it's like there's actually situations where it's like the melee weapon actually works best. Our pistol, like it fires quickly, but it's accurate. So like it's great at a long distance. The shotgun's like your typical shotgun. But then our pulsar, which is kind of like the Doom plasma rifle, like the missiles on it actually drop. So it's as a result, like the weapon's actually it's only useful like at short range. So we're kind of taking what those games did, but kind of refining it and kind of trying to reinvent those to to actually make it a better designed game. But it's difficult. I mean, kind of the challenge we've run into is that, people don't appreciate those changes, realize, oh, well, it actually makes this a better game. They're just kind of like, oh, it's not supposed to be like that. In the original Doom, it didn't work that way, so why does it work differently here? And it's hard. I kind of think you have to make things different enough so that people aren't, if things are like too similar, then people are going to expect them to be similar all around, because people are going to like relate it to what they already know. But if it's something that's like totally different, that doesn't remind them of existing things, then I think you kind of have more freedom there. You're not going to risk upsetting people.
Sure, but do you feel like the loss of the balance there would be that you kind of maybe alienate people who don't have anything to draw, a frame of reference to?
Yeah, I think that actually works better. If people are coming into it fresh, like they just kind of get to experience, the game in all its glory, and it's not tainted by, kind of what came before it. I've actually seen this happen, like in other games. Like there's a game I play a lot, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and as you can tell, because it's 3, there's one that came before it. So I mean, there was Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which a bunch of people played like hardcore for like about 10 years or so before number 3 came out. And the people who were like really, really hardcore into 2, like they did not like 3, because I mean 3 like did all these things differently. I mean, they were the right design choices, like they made the game better, but it's just the people who played 2 like really hardcore, they were just too used to how 2 was. So basically, when 3 came along, it was popular with like a new group of players, basically. It's like the people who were like just super hardcore into Marvel 2, like they just couldn't embrace the newness of 3. It just clashed with everything they had already come to associate with the series and the skill set they had built up. So I kind of think we have a little bit of that same problem with Doom. So which is probably why we got to find a new audience.
So do you feel like this is kind of, what I'm trying to sort of build here is that, especially with Kickstarter, we've seen a lot of resurgence of old things becoming new again. And some of them are done, with varying degrees of success or whatever. But it seems like reinvention in a general sense is kind of a thing in the video game industry. Do you think that overall, that's a good thing? Do you think it's always healthy to go back and kind of reevaluate and explore what made things so good and try to capture the essence of that sort of stuff and bring it back? Or do you feel like maybe we're just all living a lie and that was lightning in a bottle and we all just need to kind of grow up?
No. I mean, I definitely think it's worth it to go back and explore what made those things great. I think today, like we're way too obsessed with novelty. I don't think that's sustainable. There's only so many totally new ideas you can think of. And probably a good reason why most of them haven't been done is because they're not very good ideas. You don't really see this happen too much with film, which by the way does not shy away from the remake in any way whatsoever. With games, I actually think it's more relevant with games to go back and kind of reinvent and redo what was done earlier versus film, just because the technology has come so far with games. There's obviously been huge advances in graphics and all sorts of networking technology and everything. 30 years ago, like you couldn't really do multiplayer games, period. But now, I mean, there's so much you can do. That's a whole nother dimension you can explore with an idea or concept that was made for a great game 20, 30 years ago. So I just think it's really important to explore previous games and kind of figure out what made them great. I think if you kind of re-examine those things, there's so much you can learn from just seeing them and putting them under a microscope and just really kind of digging deep into those.
So essentially, what I'm kind of trying to build towards here is that there is this sentiment that games are now the primary vehicle for art and for artistic expression. And as such, maybe we find ourselves kind of at a crossroads of responsibility and expression in a time where we really haven't before. And so this week, we've seen a trailer for a game called Hatred released, which puts you in the shoes of a mass murderer whose only goal is to kill innocent civilians and to put himself into a position where he'll basically, be the recipient of suicide by cop. The end of his reign of terror only comes in the form of a vindicated bullet fired from the barrel of law enforcement. But you look at something like that, and, I, as a gamer, saw a lot of elements of older games. There's a isometric sort of, gameplay. It's a top-down shooter. It's a tac shooter, from what I can tell, a tactical shooter with, some quick time events and some melee elements. Obviously, something like that is influenced by a pedigree of a certain kind of game, but it's taking these things to an extreme. Where do we have a responsibility as a collective, of consumers, as a collective of creators, as all of these things, to censor ourselves or to bring attention to something that might be controversial? And do we have that right or the authority to do those things?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Basically, I think to kind of understand what this game is and what should be done, you kind of got to look at the role of games as a medium and basically why they're so popular and why they're a thing. Basically, what it kind of comes down to, and this isn't my theory, I wish I knew who came up with this. I read it in the introduction to I think it's a game design or game programming book, but it's either way, it's a fantastic theory. But basically, we as humans, we enjoy things that help us survive. So that's why we enjoy things like food and shelter and community and positions of prominence, because these are things that help us survive and propagate the species. With that perspective, then looking at movies, so we enjoy movies because they teach us lessons. We see a character go through an experience, and we kind of live vicariously through that character, and we learn the lessons that he learns, and we profit from his experience without actually having to subject ourselves to harm. So you can see how that's a very useful thing. And games, I think, are similar, but they're a little bit different. Basically, games are building. You're basically building survival skills. So that's why we enjoy games like Call of Duty or Doom or something, or it's like a lot of hunting and gathering. Men specifically, this is a big thing. And there's a lot of games, like a World of Warcraft, where you're doing a lot of stuff in communities. So basically, the kind of survival skill you're building is kind of learning to cooperate with others and kind of all come together and overcome an obstacle. That's kind of why games are kind of an important medium. So, and then you have a game like Hatred, where it's like, I don't know what skills it's trying to reinforce. I don't know what a lot of it just kind of strikes me as it being a bad game. So, hopefully something like that, like it's just not going to resonate with people.
Let's ask you something right here. Why do you hope that it doesn't resonate with people? In your own personal opinion, do you feel like a game like Hatred does any good for our industry? Do you think you can point to something like that and say, look, there's our anti-hero, there's our champion of expression, there's the game that bucks and defies all trends and sticks it to the man? Or is this really just a exercise in gratuitous over-the-top violence for the sake of, look at me, I'm so edgy and cool?
The one thing I could say that is good about it is that it's probably getting crazy people off the streets. It gives these people like an outlet. So hopefully if there is someone out there who does want to go on some crazy killing spree, hopefully this is enough to kind of pacify them and get them. Hopefully this is going to satisfy their urge and everything. It isn't going to do anything to encourage them to actually go carry this out. Okay, so you could try and make the case that, this terrible game is going to cause people to go out and commit violent crimes. But if you look at the increase in in video games is, being this, especially specifically violent video games, is growing in popularity. At the same time that these games are becoming more popular, you actually see violent crime going down. So if you try to make the case that violent video games are causing these crimes, I think you would have a hard time proving that. At the same time, I'm not trying to say that the drop in crime is being caused by these people being off the streets and playing video games instead. But I'm just trying to say that if you were trying to argue the opposite point, I think you would have a difficult time. But as far as like this game, should it be banned or anything like that? There is one problem that I do think games have. That's something that is. I think movies have an advantage over games in this department. Movies have, is something I'm sure you all aware of. Well, maybe not in Europe, but there's the MPAA, which is basically like a kind of a self-policing organization for movies. They're in charge of all the ratings and everything that get doled out to movies, and they basically are able to regulate who they can stop children from basically seeing movies. And in games, you kind of have the ESRB in the United States and PEGI in Europe. I don't think it's nearly as popular, and I don't think it's nearly as influential as the MPAA. I know we just had a game come out on Steam a couple of weeks ago, and there was no regulatory oversight on that whatsoever. It could be Rec could be all penises and boobs and just blood everywhere, and I don't. There was nothing to stop it. You can make the argument like, oh well, if you had a release, a big retail outlet, you wouldn't be able to do that. You would have to go through these regulatory agencies. But yeah, Steam's a pretty major distribution platform. So,
do you think too that some governing body like Steam or one of these places where this game is likely to try to seek digital distribution, do you think that they're going to find some resistance from some of these digital publishers? Do you think it'll be hard for them to kind of find a way to get this game out there? Do you think they're going to find some resistance from some of those people? Or do you think this is going to be something I see on Greenlight in January?
I suspect that this is like a pretty big budget game. So they're probably going to have to go through like, the ESR if they want to have like a physical release. I'm not sure what platforms this game specifically is going to be on. Yeah, this game in particular is probably going to have to go through the ESRB, but I think Steam probably wants to. They would like to avoid as much regulation as possible. So unless there's a gun to our head, I'm sure Valve would allow this to be on Steam. It's all going to come down to how much outrage there is and how much people demand they pull it. So I don't know. I mean, that would be a really interesting thing to see.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for your insight into kind of the creative process, what you think the role of reinvention is in games and art in general, and then for just kind of your thoughts on censorship and its role in the gaming industry. And definitely thank you for talking to us about Hatred. It was really cool to get a developer perspective and insight into someone else's creative approach. And it'll be interesting in the coming months to see how that all plays out. If anybody wanted to keep up with you, go ahead and shamelessly self-promote yourself. Go throw out your Twitter, throw out your site, your game, and where people can come and pay homage to you.
Yeah, well, on Twitter, I am at FBE Carnival, FBECarnevil. And the name of the game is Wrack, WRACK. You can find it on Steam just by searching it, or you can find it through our website, wrackgame.com. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me. Just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
So hot on the heels of the last kind of game-based discussion was probably the most game-heavy discussion we've had on the show yet. And that was Brad, of course, who's created Skulltag for one of my favorite games of all time, Doom. And he made a terrific shooter, Rack. But I don't even know where to start, Robin. Brad kind of, in a way, talked about why we even exist in that conversation, and it leaves me a little lost for words.
Well, you can understand why him and Carmack got on so well, isn't it? Yeah.
So let's talk about his whole conversation about the role of reinvention within art. How do you sort of see the role of reinvention today in modern society? There's a lot of people who love it, understand the need for it as, creative people, and there's a large number of people who think that reinvention totally sucks and that it's selling out and phoning it in, and that reboots are the worst thing ever.
Well, in some cases they can be. I mean, I think it really depends on who's doing it more than anything else. I mean, you can't write off anything. Imagine a brief to any team that comes along. Some people don't get to choose what they do, and it's up to them whether they get to do something with it or not. Look at Lego Star Wars, for example. Can you imagine when that first got handed out to you as a team, you'd be sitting there kind of going, oh, God's sakes, Lego and Star Wars, this is going to be, oh, man. But these guys went, no, we're going to make this the best Lego Star Wars game that we possibly ever can. And they did. And it goes to show that you can take whatever concept comes your way, and if you put your heart and soul into it, you can make something wonderful.
Yeah, I guess it is it comes down to how much you give a shit. But, it's sort of one of the other things that you can also take elements of things that are old and often forgotten and smash them up with new concepts, new experiences, and find plenty of mileage there. And Rack, Brad's current game, is a testament to that in a lot of ways. You don't typically see a first-person shooter that gives you the ability to do like kill combos and then pair you up with a boss fight at the end of a few stages. That's
maybe this is his midlife crisis. He's sort of like, I really love making Doom. I want to go back, man. I want to have another go at it.
I mean, that was the other thing that jumped out at me it was like playing Contra with, the boss fights, the patterns, the escalation of, like strategy and everything.
But he kept it very simple, didn't it? It was very, boxy and chambers of enemies, wasn't it? It was handed out to you in little chunks. So you'd go through a door, you'd go through a corridor. He didn't really try to make it too, visceral in the sense of large landscapes or anything like that. He kept it in these chambers. But he was making sure that it was really about the combat rather than about the scenery.
True. The other thing about that, too, is it's like the way he designed the game is it's like different scenarios within the game kind of represent puzzles in the way that you kill the enemies. So like he said, there's different scenarios where like the sword, is much better to take out a specific type of enemy, or the pistol has an advantage over, say, like a high-powered plasma rifle. You as the player figuring out the best configuration for the equipment to take on, the present threat in front of you is a part of, keeping the flow of the action moving. And like he said, in a way, that's solving a puzzle in the framework of his game is figuring out how to keep the action consistent by changing the tool.
He was trying to keep himself within limits, from what I heard from him. He was really trying to sort of like keep it in voluntary limits. I think he sort of missed having to work within certain boundaries. I mean, when you're in certain parameters that you can't necessarily escape, that's when your creativity can really explode.
It also goes to something he said where he's trying to create an experience within the game that's evocative of why we even exist as people, and that's because we play video games to survive. We play them to adapt. And
the hunter spirit.
Right, exactly. So he said he designed his game in the essence of like a hunter-gatherer kind of mindset where you're hunting foes, gathering tools to survive this harsh environment. And it goes back to a primal instinct in a lot of ways of, the basic things that drove us as people, which is really cool. I mean, I've never heard any other game developer say anything akin to that or like that. That was really cool and introspective.
I'm sure maybe it was him who said it during the. I've read a few
right. He was
interviews
saying
when it
that
comes
he
to
was.
Doom.
Yeah, he picked that up from. Yeah, the design ethos for Doom. My mistake. Yeah, so he's echoing the sentiment of how Doom was designed, which makes complete and total sense when you think about Doom. That's why Doom was such a runaway success, and maybe that's why first-person shooters in general are such a giant success, is because they've never really deviated from that basic formula of kill, find things.
I was interested in his, I would call dismissal of hatred, which is interesting to me, really, of somebody who had probably gone through similar press when Doom came out. I mean, if you can imagine, you look at Rack, and that is basically, obviously, him going back to his roots of his Doom roots. But when Doom and Quake and all that came out, they were railed for it. It's bloody, it's disgusting, it's too much, it's over the top, it's just a killing simulator, all that sort of thing. So it's interesting for someone who's grown up out of that now and is looking at something new that's coming out that is really considered pretty much the same as what Doom was back then. I mean, Rack, by comparison, is sort of cute now. So I was expecting him to give it more of a chance.
I feel like what it comes down to is the conversation we had earlier in the episode, and that's framing. It's all about context for everyone. You can defend Doom because you can say, well, it's not like I'm mowing down a bunch of innocent people. Look, these are demons from hell. They have it coming. If you saw a demon and you had a shotgun, you're not going to prepare him a turkey dinner. You're going to fill his face full of lead.
Well, I suppose that the level when it comes to hatred is that this guy thinks they have it coming too,
Is that, again, like I said, it's the framing of that. You can see when you're going up against a demon who's throwing fireballs at you that poses an imminent threat. There's a clear and present danger there. You need to defend yourself or else you're going to die.
Yeah, but this is looking through the eyes of that monster.
I don't see, though, that well, okay, let me play the devil's advocate here. If you needed to play a Doom game that pitted you as one of the monsters, there's still going to be someone shooting at you. I think what Brad is kind of getting at, though, is that there's no clear and present danger in hatred. There's no imminent threat. You are the imminent threat to everyone else for no good goddamn reason whatsoever.
It's certainly a change in the way that a game is normally looked upon. You are the bad guy.
I can understand some of his questions. I'll put it that way. But I mean, does he bring up a cogent enough point that will echo with society at large when the game is released? Or is it going to be successful in spite of its trajectory,
Well, I suspect he'll, like many people, they will listen to what the news has to say about it. And the news will have something to say about it. And I think in many cases, the Hatred team know very well that the news will have something to say about it and are willing to let that happen. And let's be frank, I don't think the guys in Doom thought that was any harm to their sales either.
No, in fact, I'm fairly certain that they were relishing the media attention at the time. I guess what it comes down to is somebody should probably just talk to those guys over there at Destructive Creations about that old Hatred game.
Yeah, we should give them an interview.
Yeah, I think we should give them a call. Well, that does it for episode 2 of Carbon Based Gaming Radio. Next week, we're going to be talking to somebody very, very special, the FX designer for Hatred, a game that you've heard mentioned on this show quite a number of times now. Are you looking forward to that as much as I am, Robin?
This is going to be good.
It should be pretty awesome. So, finally, we're going to get some closure on a few things around here. In the meantime, our listeners in the U.S., I want to say, Happy Thanksgiving, dudes. Eat some turkey for us, and hopefully when you tune in again, you're fat, happy, and ready to listen to some awesome discussions about gaming.
And for anyone in the UK, just stay out of the wet.
So from me, Steve Tom Sawyer,
and me, Robin Gething,
we're saying goodbye.
Take it easy, folks. Thanks for listening.
If you'd like to follow the Carbon Based Gaming team on Twitter, you can follow us at
CBG Radio, that's at CBG RADIO, or at RSOL GTP, and last, at ReviewMage, that's at REVUEMAGE.
Mindless Zombie Studios is an up-and-coming website for gaming and geek culture. From video game reviews of traditional games to what it's like to be gamers and geeks, MZS seeks to cover it all with voices from the community. MindlessZombieStudios.com, because gaming isn't dead, it's undead.
Additional support for Carbon Based Gaming Radio is provided by SoundCloud Ultimate.